streaming software. It's going out online now. I don't think anyone can hear us. Actually, I can test by going into Twitter and just seeing if they can hear us. Out online now. I don't think anyone can hear us. Oh, they can hear us. They can hear us. Oh, we are actually broadcasting, so we just need to. They can hear us. They can hear us. So. Oh, we are actually broadcasting, so we just need to. So. Well, welcome to this first ever Solas webinar. We live in very strange times with the coronavirus lockdown, and we are experiencing moving more online. So for all of you who are watching this either live, who caught that we're doing this, or watching on catch up, welcome. We've got some really exciting webinars and really quite interesting ones in the weeks ahead. But the purpose of the webinar this afternoon is not just to test the technology, but I want to introduce someone to you. Joining me on this first ever Solas webinar, coming all the way from Belfast in Northern Ireland. I'm based in Dundee in Scotland. But joining me all the way from Belfast in Northern Ireland, Gareth Black. Welcome, Gareth.
Hi Andy, it's great to be with you, and hello to everybody watching now.
So for those of you who have been tracking with Solas for some time, you may be aware of me. I'm Andy Bannister, the director of Solas, but Gareth, we're very excited to announce, has just joined the Solas team as our second speaker, evangelist, and apologist. And how long have you actually been with us, Gareth? Still pretty new, really.
Yeah, I think less than 3 weeks at this stage. So
that explains the sort of bits of polystyrene packing that you can still see around Gareth there on the screen.
The baptism by fire. No, I'm joking. It's great.
Well, we thought it'd be a great opportunity both to test the technology, but also to introduce people to you, Gareth, and for them to find out a bit about you. So to kind of sort of kick the kind of interview off, why don't you tell us a bit about your story? Obviously, you now are based with Solas, but tell us a bit about your journey. How have you got to where you are?
Well, you'll probably have picked up already from my accent that I'm an Irishman, proud Irishman. I grew up just outside the city of Belfast and have lived in and around Belfast for the majority of my life. I've lived in London for a short time and then Oxford, most recently for about 5 years, but been here in Ireland for the majority of the time. And of course, Northern Ireland doesn't always have the best reputation as a spokesperson for Christianity because of our sectarian history that often gets conflated with religion. But it is where I grew up. I grew up sort of the last decade of what became known as the Troubles. In fact, my own primary school was damaged when an IRA bomb went off in the car park of an adjacent hotel. Not many people, I'm sure, have a story like that from their childhood. Thankfully, no one was there at the time. It was late on a Sunday evening, but that was in some ways the context that we grew up in, quite a sectarian, divided community. And yet it was a great place to grow up. And I think the most significant part of my childhood for me was the fact that I had Christian parents for whom their faith was deeply meaningful and fundamental to how they understood life and how they lived. So I didn't always appreciate having Christian parents at the time, but I can remember many times sort of bumping into my parents' faith as I walked into rooms and saw them praying, which of course didn't mean that it was real, but it did have an impression on me as a young man to say that if this is at least very real for them and can be taken seriously by some adults, I would say. So I came to faith myself as a teenager. Shortly after that, after a time of indifference to sort of Christian things, and really that sort of set the whole trajectory for my entire life, really from then.
I'm fascinated, particularly by that story there you tell, Gareth, as growing up in a very sort of sectarian kind of setting. For folks who don't perhaps know the kind of Belfast setting or the Northern Ireland setting, what is it like today in terms of religion? I think from the outside looking in, there's a perception that it's a very religious part of the UK. Is that still true, or is the culture there sort of changing a bit these days?
Yeah, well, Ireland itself is colloquially known as the land of saints and scholars, and so religion has been integrated very deeply into our society really since the 5th century, and unfortunately it's often been conflated really for the past 2 centuries with certain political persuasions, sort of Irish nationalism and sort of unionism and things like that. And as I said, that did cause a lot of sectarian violence, particularly sort of the second half of the last century. It's changed a lot, particularly throughout my lifetime, so the last 20 years or so. It's changed significantly, and I would say a lot of those sort of orange-green nationalist unionist sort of divides have largely lost their influence for many people. It's still sort of entrenched a little bit in our political system, but it has also raised a lot of problems, I think, for the gospel and for people's hearing of Christianity in this culture, because a lot of people, they look at that sort of ugly side of our history and as I say, conflate it with religion and belief in God and kind of the Christopher Hitchens stuff. This is religion poisoning everything. Ireland would be a better place without religion kind of idea. And a lot of people are just weary of that divide. And unfortunately, because they've equated religion with that, they're often weary of religion. A lot of people think they know what Christianity is, and they've kind of seen an ugly caricature of it. Some of them have, particularly in more sort of institutional religious settings, some of the religion has done a lot of damage, and there's been a lot of abuse of trust by those who bear the name of Christianity. And it's created a lot of, first of all, apathy, but also in some sectors hostility, because people's history with Christianity hasn't always been a positive one.
It's very interesting hearing you say that, because I remember about 3 years ago having the privilege of coming to Belfast and doing an evangelistic event, an open forum. The church I would come to speak for had booked this art centre down on the Falls Road, which is like, right in the hot zone of what had been the Troubles. And as I asked them, well, what topic would you like me to address? They went for exactly that. They said, well, could you come and do something on, does religion poison everything? I think it was, has religion caused more harm than good? Because they said that was, in their experience, one of the number one issues, that people had this experience of what they thought Christianity was, and of course, and that baggage had caused them to reject Jesus. So, Gareth, that's obviously, one of the evangelistic hurdles. That's the legacy of what's gone on there in Northern Ireland's history. What about the church itself, do you think the church is kind of woken up to perhaps the way the culture is changing, and is sort of going sort of forward on all four cylinders firing, or is there still perhaps a bit of a need for the church and for Christians to come to grips with some of the current, perhaps new questions that are being asked? Where do you think the church is in terms of Northern Irish culture right now?
Well, I think the church has, on the whole, largely responded to the culture at large as things have opened up, as the troubles have kind of died away and peace and prosperity have emerged. I think the church has naturally sort of gone with the tide, as it were, in a good way. And I think the church is still keen to engage people, still keen to draw people in. We're still a very religious nation. It's hard to sort of live in a development or be in any kind of working community or anything like that where there may not be somebody who is either a Christian or at least know somebody who is. And that brings opportunities for the church, and that brings challenges for the church, and maybe we can go into those a little bit more specifically as we go on. But I think certainly immediately beyond the immediate challenge of coronavirus that we're all having to deal with regardless of our context, I think before coronavirus sort of dominated the horizon, we experienced some major cultural changes, particularly in the realm of ethics, in the political and in the legal sphere. And as much as there might be questions about how that came about, I think in some ways it's just symptomatic of an increasing change in culture towards sort of Christian values and certainly Christian ethics in terms of life and sexual ethics. And that's raising big questions for how the church will respond. And I think we're still working those out as we go.
So one of the things that we're very excited about at Solas, Gareth, is you're going to be based right there in Belfast. We're not asking you to leave Belfast and come and join us in Scotland. We have this kind of vision at Solas of a distributed team of speakers around the country and the regions, and obviously myself in Scotland, now you in Ireland. What do you see as some of the things that perhaps Solas can offer to the church there in Belfast, where you're in Northern Ireland, more widely? What are some of the things that perhaps we can bring and help with? Because really what the thing that excites me about Solas has always been, we don't try and come and sort of tell the church how to do it, we come alongside. What are some of the ways that you see that's going to be perhaps a real opportunity there where you are?
Yeah, I think that idea of coming alongside is going to be key to any influence and opportunities that Solas are going to have. And in fact, it's because that's Solas's ethos, not sort of coming in and telling everybody how they've been doing it wrong and how this is how to do it better, but really listening and engaging. I think that's going to be helpful because among the regions, maybe not so much in the big cities, but among certainly the regional parts of the UK, relationships are often built on trust. And so people do want to know that you're there to work with them rather than to sort of have them work for your own particular agendas. And that's integral to Solas's vision. I think in terms of the opportunities, I think there's two ways that I see we could go as a culture with this sort of stream of secularism that's increasing as it is in much of Western Europe. One is to retreat from culture, and kind of there's still enough Christians numerically, there's still enough of an infrastructure here to almost ghetto our faith and remove it from the public square altogether for sort of purposes of self-preservation. I don't think that that's the right way to go. I know Solas don't think that's the right way to go. I know many church leaders here don't think that's the right way to go. But there's still this question of how do we then positively engage in a culture that has many questions, some disenfranchisement? How do we get a fresh, helpful, positive hearing for the gospel? And I think the best way to do that is to really engage people through encouraging them to both articulate and to then explore their big questions. I grew up in a Christian context in Northern Ireland where questions weren't encouraged, and often questions were seen as a crisis of faith rather than a way to augment and further establish your faith. And I think if we're going to do any kind of meaningful evangelism beyond sort of just being, friendly neighbors who don't cause much trouble and all the rest of it, if we're really going to positively engage people, we need to sort of take their questions seriously and not be offended by them, and not get defensive about them, but to really positively explore them, and ask them questions about their own particular worldview and value system, and just go on a journey with people, as I think there's plenty of biblical precedent for that.
And I think the interesting about questions, I completely agree with you there. I mean, firstly, I think it's interesting that we live in an age in which people are asking ever more questions. If it's the same over there as it is over here, the coronavirus crisis has generated all kinds of questions, and some of the statistics on the number of people engaging with Christian content online is fascinating. We're finding that at Solas too, things like our short answer videos. But then I love your point about what happens when you take people's questions seriously. I know, like me, you're also doing online events right now, and I did one for a group in the north of Scotland a week or so ago. Just got a lovely email in the last day or so. And so what was interesting was one of the things that came back from the feedback was they said, just so refreshing to come across Christians who are willing to listen to questions. They picked up on the fact that I took the time to try and learn everyone's name, to address questions by name. And I remember I said to the email, it wasn't anything about me. That was the way I was taught, through the way I was raised and mentored. But when you do that, is what happens. That people who come in quite nervous are like, oh, hang on, I can ask that question. And Gareth, Andy are not going to slap me down. They're not going to say what's a daft question, but they're going to try and engage it. Gareth, obviously we live in coronavirus lockdown conditions now, so the opportunities for doing evangelism and training events like we like to do are limited. What are some of the things that we can be doing right now? Are you finding there are opportunities even though you can't get out much, or are you just sort of sitting there twiddling your thumbs going, gosh, what do I do?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly trying to adhere to the government guidelines, and I know there's a little bit of a discrepancy between where you are in the regions, but I do think we're at a significant time in our history in terms of a lot of the things that we either had enough distraction from not having to consider the big questions, the questions of meaning and purpose, but also the other things that we often place our meaning and our purpose and our values in. I think coronavirus has shaken a lot of that and undermined a lot of that, and that just naturally raises questions about what is really meaningful, and what is life ultimately all about, and is there hope in this world that is more than just sort of sentimentalism and stuff that even coronavirus can't undermine. And so I think people naturally have these questions, and I think the fact that we're in a context that everybody's involved in, everybody's experiencing this in different ways, I think the opportunity to ask people just how they're doing and hope, that sort of leads towards opportunities to go a little bit further. People are struggling with financial questions, the economy, people are struggling with their business, people are trying to juggle doing homeschool and still maintain their business and their work commitments and things like that. It's a difficult and it's a testing time for people, and like any sort of test, it sort of draws out what's really inside. So I think there's real opportunities. I think it's very fertile ground to engage with what people truly believe, and then often positively and persuasively present the gospel in a way that is a hope that transcends anything that we can find in this world. So whether that's just trying to have a conversation, if you're clapping the NHS at 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening, or whether that's just meeting people out in the street, or trying to engage people when you're at the park, obviously maintaining social distance and things like that. I think the fact that people are so isolated on lockdown, they're more open to talk. They have more time to talk than they actually would normally have under different circumstances. And I think if we can just be engaged, find common ground with people, and then see where the conversation goes, and just maybe put our head above that parapet and just ask about, how do you make sense of all this? Do you have any hope beyond this? Those kinds of questions. Again, questions are much better than just propositions, because they're very disarming and they're inviting people to sort of share rather than sort of making sort of propositions that people have to sort of take or leave, at any time. And it just builds relationships. And at the very basic level, the stronger the relationships can be, I think the more opportunities there will be for going further when those conversations about the gospel.
I think that's right. I think there's something, something to be said for, prayerfully thinking about as for those, for us who are Christians, how can we be laying the sort of foundations and the seeds now for some follow-up that will be coming when conditions ease. Obviously, one of the things that we're doing at Solas that you and I are partnering on that we're very excited about is this is just a test of the technology, really, but we have some kind of all singing, all dancing webinars coming down the line starting next week. Gareth, tell us a little bit about those. What are we going to be covering in some of those, and then as we wrap this up for people who are tracking with us, I'll put a link to those webinars up at the end of this one. But Gareth, what have we got coming up over the next few weeks?
Well, the first one is this Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's UK time here, and we'll be exploring again this similar question to we've just been talking about. We're looking at viral evangelism. So how do we maximize our evangelistic opportunity in the current context? So we'll be chatting and sharing some things that we find helpful and maybe encouraging input from people, and obviously inviting questions as well. If people have particular questions for their own context, we'll be taking questions for the whole second half of that webinar as well. So that's one, and then there's a whole stream of others. There's two that are specifically open forums or evangelistic ones that you can invite friends and neighbors or anyone that you know who might be interested in exploring, where is God in this coronavirus world, or how can I find hope and meaning in such a fragile world? So yeah, there's plenty coming up, and I'd encourage people to tune in, and hopefully we can be of resource to them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned we have that both the evangelism ones and the training ones, because I think part of the vision we have behind the webinar series, and people can find it more on the Solas website, is they're in sort of pairs. So we have a training one, which hopefully, if you're a Christian who's a bit nervous about evangelism, will help encourage you a little bit and make you think, actually, you know what, with God's help, I can do this. And then the next week there'll be an evangelism one, so you can put all you've learned in the training one into practice to invite your friends to the other one. And been hugely encouraged by talking to our friends at organizations like Christianity Explored and Alpha and many churches across the country, that actually lots of people are checking into sort of spiritual things, religious things, Christian things right now. So actually, although we're restricted physically, there are some real opportunities. Well, Gareth, it's been great talking to you. We're really excited to have you on the team, you and your wife Amy out there in Belfast. We're praying for you, and if people want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that? Are you on the sort of usual social media channels? You have all those wonderful technologies on your side of the Irish Sea.
Yes, I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, Gareth_William_Black. And I can also be contacted via my profile page on the Solas website. Fantastic. And just as we wrap this up, just for folks who want to see a little bit more about what we've got coming up, there's a couple of things just to end with a sort of brief plug for. We can only do what we do at Solas and bring people like Gareth and others on board because of the support of our friends across the country and around the world. And if you'd like to help us do more of what we do, whether it's in Scotland or Ireland or Northern Ireland, around the country, if you go to the Solas website, solas-cpc.org/book offer, if you sign up to support Solas for as little as £3 a month, the price of a coffee, not only will you help us do more evangelism, more training, we'll also send you one of 4 possible books now. Our list of kind of gifts is growing. In particular, we've just added the recent Healthy Faith book, looking at a number of ways that as Christians we can respond to coronavirus. I've got a chapter in there as some of our sort of friends and colleagues around the country. And so we'd love you to help us that way. But also, we just mentioned, Gareth and I, the seminars that are coming up, the webinars. The first of those is on the 20th of May, Wednesday, the 20th of May. That's this coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. Gareth and I will both be on that. That'll be hosted by our Solas colleague, Gavin Matthews. And we'll be looking at the whole topic of viral evangelism, how to share your faith in a locked down world. And as we've talked about on this little webinar, to go, yes, we're restricted, we've got physical distancing going on, but there are so many ways still that we can share our faith as Christians and engage with others. We're talking through some of that, and there'll be interaction, or make the ability for Q&A to happen. So to find out more, again, go to the Solas website, solas-cpc.org/webinars. Our webinars are completely free, no cost at all. Just you can watch them the same way you've watched this on Twitter or Facebook or on YouTube.
and you can watch them afterwards as well. So for those of you who watched this live, thank you for taking the time. Those of you who watched it on catch up, again, thank you for bearing with us as we've ironed out the 1 or 2 technical glitches and our first ever Solas webinar. And Gareth, again, thank you for joining us on the webinar and at the Solas team. Looking forward to seeing how the Lord uses you and as we work together over the weeks and months ahead. And have a great rest of the day, everybody.